an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Cradle, Book 6, Underlord, Chapters 13, 14, 15, and 16. In these chapters, it looks like Ethan is planning on trying to sort of turn Dross into a drudge. I'm very excited about this. Also, Charity is a crooked bitch. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Andy for commissioning this episode. We've got Toast in the chat. We've got Sam in the chat. Hi, Sam. I am really excited. I talked to you guys last time about how I got Owen to listen to the first audiobook. Well, we listened into halfway, I think, of the second audiobook on our way to Oklahoma this past weekend. And I just want to say, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but re-listening is great. These are very re-listenable books. It's really something to go back and realize how wrong Lindon's family was about how the sacred arts worked. It's just so frustrating. And there's a line that I didn't really understand what it meant at the time, where Yeren tells him that if her master had seen what Lindon's clan was teaching its children, he would have killed them all. And at the time, I was just kind of like, wow, your master sounds like a real dick. And now I'm sort of like, no, I get it. They're mean, cruel people who are coming from a place of complete ignorance. And I feel like I'd find that really hard to forgive, you know. I mean, you know, killing them is extreme. I'm just saying. And also, it's really funny because realizing how little they know, it's sort of like going back in time, but talking to a doctor, you know, and it's like they kind of get it, but they have such wrong information and they're still administering cocaine for things. And you're just like, guys, no, what are you doing? So, yeah, I'm looking forward to re-listening even more. But he has carried on by himself and is like partway, like close to the end, I think, of book 2 already. So that's fun. So these chapters, so much to talk about. So Dross is basically put in a position by being fed Dream Madra and being given a dream tablet of, is that what this is called? Of full of information to absorb. He is put in a position to be of ideal help to Lindon as a soulsmith. And this is pretty cool. I had kind of forgotten about Drudges because we haven't spent all that much time around Gesha since things have been really popping off. And, you know, I was sort of thinking the other day about the fact that he had wanted to be a soulsmith, that it was like something that seemed to sort of speak to him. And that since like some of the first sections with him following Gesha and getting her to convincing her to take him on, we haven't seen him in the workshop that much. We've been told that he's been in there, but we haven't seen it other than him figuring out what to do with his remnant arm and having to like repair that. And other than that, the one bit of real soulsmithing we saw was him moving Dross into the, what is it? Heart of the Ocean? No, that's from Titanic. Eye of the Ocean? Is it Eye of the Ocean? Anyway. So, yeah. Andy's here. Eye of the Deep. Thank you, Andy. So, this is really fun to watch because Dross is so, like, kind of arrogant. It's like, it comes across as arrogant, but I feel like it's not exactly arrogant. It's more that he's just stating things from his limited understanding. And you add a sort of snarky layer to it because of the way that you think he means it. But I'm not entirely certain he's being snarky all the time. Sometimes I feel like I'm assigning that to him, and that's not even what he intends. But regardless, Ethan feeds him some dream madra, and he's sort of like, it's a scale. And Dross is sort of like, well, that's awesome and everything, but like, is that it? Is that it, really? And then we have the, what do you call it? The moment where he is asked to create a illusion for Lindon. And this is such a wild idea, knowing that he's creating this and nobody else can see it. Only Lindon can see it, which, it's a little bit like off-putting in a way. It's sort of like knowing that there's something in Lindon's being that could fool him this thoroughly is honestly a teeny tiny bit scary, because he's like, later on, by the time Dross has like leveled up a little, he's able to make it like very realistic, you know, and I don't believe that Dross would use that power for ill, but I mean, like, who knows? He could. And I just don't personally like that concept. So at this point, Ethan tells Fisher Gesha, let's see, she is asked to give Lindon a job that is maybe a bit beyond him. And he has to test out the different, like, options as best he can in his mind. And Dross eventually is added to the mix to help. But Dross shows him this construct succeeding no matter what type of shell he uses. And is essentially like, look, I can show you this stuff and it seems really real and helpful. It's not actually helpful. It's really like just me creating hypothetical scenarios without any information behind it. So at this point, he says he's a great help, but he can't replace a drudge. And Ethan says, so he's lacking knowledge of Madra aspects and how they interact. And then he holds up the ball of spinning copper plates, which I cannot picture that in my head. I wish I could, but the way this looks with the light coming out of the middle, it's hard for me to like pin down. I sort of picture it as like if there were a sphere in the middle of light and somebody had taken like pennies and glued it all to the outside, you know? I'm not sure if that's correct at all, but, let's see. Ethan says, I was surprised to find it here. Cassius carried it with him when he left Serpent's Grave, and I borrowed it. And he tells Dross to jump in and figure out what he can from the information in there. And it turns out Dross is like not capable of absorbing it all. It's so much info. And Ethan is sort of reinforcing him with more dream madra to strengthen him and then sending him back in there. And it's really wild to see Ethan using his like training technique, which is essentially, I'll give you something to strengthen you and then throw you into a pit of fucking vipers and hopefully you get out. It's weird to see him using that on something that isn't human, you know? So at this point, he comes out, gets fed, goes back in, and then eventually comes back out and is like, oh God, I need to digest. I can't take anymore. It's like he ate too much, you know? It's like Thanksgiving dinner for him just ended and he is about to go lay on the couch and just groan for 20 minutes. So Ethan says, try that experiment again and see what happens. And this time he's able to create a very convincing illusion. It's like an illusion combined with a prediction, where he shows exactly how shit would go with much more accurate information. And Lindon can see how the whole thing actually comes together and works, and the way that it would have to be built in order for it to function the way that it needs to. And it's sort of like a very delicate, detailed construction that probably would have taken a lot of trial and error if he didn't have this well of information to draw from. So he goes ahead and begins to do it. And Fisher Gesha, a couple times, she's watching him and obviously a little bit like concerned because he's doing some shit that he didn't seem to have the skill for not very long ago. And it's something he's dealing with a construct that is intended to explode. Like that's what the person ordered, was something explosive. So it's dangerous. And there are a few times where she sort of wants to step in and Ethan has to stop her. And eventually Lindon finishes and holds it up. And she is just like, well, good God damn. That is gorgeous. And I love when she says something like, that's a cheat. You're cheating. And he starts to apologize. And she says, no, cheat some more. And later on just says to him, you are going to make me a fortune. And honestly, I really enjoy Fisher Gesha when she gets in this sort of place. She's so like, there's so much avarice, but it's combined with this like deep appreciation as well for what it is he can do. And like saying it's cheating is honestly hilarious. I mean, she's not wrong in a way, but a drudge is also cheating. And that's really what the sacred arts kind of is, to be honest. It's just figuring out better and quicker ways to cheat, all like everywhere. And it makes sense that that's like when we first get to meet Lindon, that's what he is relying so much on, is cheating, because he doesn't have access to the sacred arts in the same way that other people do. So he has to figure out other ways to cheat, and it's still cheating, but you know, he's like, it just seems less honorable to them because we've all agreed on the ways that you're allowed to cheat and you're not using those ways. And it's sort of like, yeah, well, guys, I don't know how to tell you this, but you still are all like figuring out loopholes and shit. So get over it. So I love this part. He thinks to himself about like fighting Kiro and what if he has to face him again before he has reached Underlord. And as he is wondering about that, he asks whether or not Dross could help make weapons. And when Dross is like, first of all, I need some rest, but yes, I definitely can as long as I have blueprints. He like immediately is like, I am going to get my Skysworn armor. It's going to be lit. He is going to do some crazy shit to that. I have no doubt. But right before that happens, he goes and thanks Ethan, and he asks Dross, how do I reinforce my arm to withstand the advancement to Underlord? Because evidently, if he advances to Underlord, he gets his real arm back. Now, I feel like that's sort of glossed over in the way it's described. And I think I'm understanding that correctly. But let's just revisit that. That's bonkers. You could grow your arm back. Really? Oh. I mean, let's see. I did misunderstand. Brian says, I think you misread. Andy says, it's more that his existing arm isn't pure enough to survive advancing to Underlord. Okay, so he doesn't regrow his arm. It would just disconnect from him and probably, like, in doing so, I don't know, be destroyed, but it would be tough to reconnect. That feels like a real liability then. Like, all right. Well, anyway, Dross says you need a source of Lord level hunger Madra. And so he says to Ethan, would it be possible for you to get me the Archstone? And Ethan does this whole thing with like, oh, it's so difficult. I mean, do you know what you're asking? Do you expect me to be able to do the impossible? And even I knew, Lindon, what you're supposed to say is, yes, Ethan, I believe that you can do the impossible. But he doesn't. He just goes, oh, I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. Let me see if there's an alternative. And Ethan's like, no. You're supposed to say, yes, of course you can do I have it for you in a couple weeks. And I was like, Lindon, when are you going to learn? He loves showing off. That's his favorite thing in the entire world. Of course he set himself up to show off. Come on, buddy. You got to learn to play this with him a little bit. Like, you know, but it is funny. So let's see. He says, that is more than I deserve. I will never be able to repay you. Ethan says something like, you won't be able to repay me yet. And Lindon's like, I don't like the sound of that, but okay. And just sort of lets it go. And then we go to Yaren. Guys, this scene, woo! So Yaren's been eating, trying to replenish herself after this injury that she has sustained, and trying to get herself back into fighting shape despite the fact that she's gonna die any minute. Not any minute, but you know. And she can sense the blood shadow trying to reach the food that's sitting out, and keeps holding it back until finally she's really eaten enough and tired, and she finally lets it out. And it looks just like her, except that it can like open its mouth more widely. It's clearly got a fluidity to its body still, despite looking very, very similar to her. And it starts eating with her mouth and just being real creepy. And she finally asks it, why didn't you end me? Which was something that I had also wondered, but didn't really have time to ask about, because I always run out of time, as y'all know. I was like, you know, it slipped its leash. It escapes and pulls a ton of her life energy away, but it doesn't quite kill her. Why not? And when she asks, the answer that she gets is much more of an impression, but she realizes that what it's saying is basically like, you've been feeding me and helping me to grow. Why would I fuck that up? And it just doesn't want to have to be responsible for itself. She's hosting it. And that's wonderful for this thing. This is why she hadn't wanted to develop the shadow according to the sage's instruction. She knew, as Ethan had said, that turning it into a clone was her strongest bet. She wasn't so blind that she couldn't see the advantages of a second copy of herself. But every inch she gave the blood shadow was a loss. One step at a time, she was bringing a monster to life. But when she'd already lost the life aura, she hadn't seen any other choice. Now she was committed. With every mouthful, the blood shadow became a shade more solid, a notch more real. Its eyes had a glimmer of life to them. And I gotta say, so I've been wondering what Ethan's deal is with wanting her to pursue this path, because I kept trusting that he knew some secret and wasn't telling her, and I still, of course, believe that. But the more she went down the path of using it as a weapon, the more I understood her reticence, because there was a lot of me who thought, Ethan knows it's not going to be like that. You're worrying too much. And then as we moved forward with it, I was like, oh, you're not worrying too much. You were right. This is super dangerous. I still think Ethan knows something, but whatever he knows doesn't preclude the fact that this thing is a monster. And now what I believe is that the sage creating a copy of himself is one step short, or maybe more than one, of whatever it is that Ethan's thinking. I'm wondering if Yaren makes a copy of it and then consumes it the way that Longclaw did, that will do something for her. I don't know what that looks like at all. I have no idea. But there is something about the way that Ethan reacted when Longclaw consumed his blood shadow that feels like that's the key to me. The fact that he was able to do that. It doesn't seem as if anything that Yeren has come across yet has contained the information that you can consume it at all. Because if it did, I think she would have done that by now. So I think she isn't aware that's an option. And he doesn't want her to know it's an option until this thing is like more established for whatever reason. And, I have no idea how that would go. Like, if she consumed it, it seems like when it was Longclaw, it left a hole in his like spirit somehow. And he felt like it set him back. But it set him back because he hadn't really done all that much with it, but use it as a forged sort of weapon. And maybe if it's made into a copy and then you consume it, there's something like, oh, Longcloak. Thank you, Andy. I keep calling him by the name of the sword in Song of Ice and Fire. Maybe. But yeah, I think that maybe there's something about like making a copy of it that perhaps has a similar effect to how Dross is able to like psycho Madra now. Like it becomes a being in a way that it isn't yet. And so once it develops to that point, consuming it has like a different reaction because it's different. It's evolved, you know, all theory saying this is my like wild spitball in here. And then comes the best part in this whole scene. It's so fucking creepy. She's watching it eat and basically telling it, I will kill the fuck out of you if I get a chance. And if you try and like fuck with me, no problem. I'll jump off a cliff and take you with me. I don't care. Like there is no way you're gaining an inch on me. And she says, you want us both to live? You listen to me like I'm the voice of heaven. I say frog, you say jump. I say snake, you crawl. I say dog, you... A nightmarish voice scraped out of the blood shadow's throat. Woof, it said. Then it gave her a bloody grin. Oh, no. Oh, I don't like that at all. Ugh, I can talk. I hate it. Blah, 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 blah. Anyway, okay, chapter 14. So, we go to Lindon, who is cycling, and trying to figure out the reason that he is practicing the sacred arts. And he keeps trying to say, to protect my family. And then he hears Dross say, those backwoods Trugolds from an aura-poor nation with only a handful of underlords. They missed it because they were, I don't want to say stupid, ignorant, poorly educated, backward savages stumbling through their paths like blind men. He says backwoods Trugolds from an aura-poor nation. Whew, harsh. And like Sacred Valley, there were no Trugolds there at all. So he's being generous if he's talking about Sacred Valley specifically. So he keeps on trying to do this whole to protect my family. And I said last week, I really thought that was it. I thought that was the thing. And I should have known. I should have known what it was because we've known, we saw what he went through. You know, it should have been obvious, but it wasn't, at least not to me. So he's trying to figure this out, getting really, really frustrated. And he's thinking about how there's only at this point, I think like 3 days left before they select the contestants. So really, they are at the fucking edge of things. And we find out later that if you like become an Underlord in the wrong setting, that transition isn't like within 5 minutes the way it is for other things. It takes like weeks if you do that in a place that isn't optimized for it. So, it could go very, very poorly. So he's continued to make, like, he takes a break from this, continues with like forging and stuff. And at this point he gets interrupted by Mercy showing up. And she is doing her like enthusiastic, adorable thing that makes him sort of uncomfortable because he senses that there's just more to her than he knows, but she doesn't want to tell him. And she asks him, "How are you?" And he finally just is like, "I should be Underlord. I don't fucking get what's happening." And she commiserates and is just like, yeah, it can be really difficult to understand. And what's really frustrating about it is you never know if you're on the right path with getting where like closer to your true reason for it, or if it's because, or if you're like completely wrong and need to head in a total other direction. And I like the fact that Lindon's really like emphatic with agreeing with her and talking about it. Like there is just something about going through something really tough and somebody coming in and saying the exact way you're feeling and being like, "Thank you, God." And he says, "Until now, advancement has been clear. You make yourself one step stronger every day, keep practicing and cycling, and it adds up. Now, all of a sudden, it's different." And she says, "My advice is to follow your fear. It's a trick that sometimes helps to figure out your revelation. A lot of people push themselves into deadly situations, but you've done plenty of that. So follow your fear. What are you afraid of?" And he's just like, "A lot of things." So she goes, "All right, you know what? Let's do this. Get in a cycling position and we're going to do this." And she says, "What are you really afraid of underneath it all?" And then he thinks losing Yaren. And Dross says, "Are you afraid she's not going to be around to protect you anymore?" And he's like, "No, that's not it." And then he goes and is like, "Losing my family." And then he's like, "Losing people I care about, but I mean, everybody's afraid of losing family." And she's like, "Yeah, but your reason doesn't have to be unique to you. It doesn't have to be something that nobody's ever felt before. It just has to be very personal." And he says, "I left home because I was afraid of losing my family." And she says, "If that was all you wanted, then wouldn't you have stayed home to be closer, to protect them?" And he thinks at first, "I would have if I could." And then he's like, "Ooh, I wouldn't though." He'd left because back in Sacred Valley, he was the least, the weakest. He had wanted to escape. So what was he afraid of now? That he was still weak, powerless, that he was still the same useless unsouled who could change nothing. "I fight so I won't be worthless anymore," he thought. It felt the same as the hundreds of other declarations he'd made. He still wasn't sure if his answer was correct. But this time, the soul fire in his spirit quivered, and the aura around him shook with it. He would never have noticed if he hadn't been paying attention. At that moment, he had enough of a connection to the vital aura that all he had to do was pull, and she slams into him. And guys, can I tell you what I thought was happening here? Because remember when Yaren tells him, Kiro and the Seishen Empire are still after you. You better be prepared for them to turn up when it's least convenient. I really thought he was about to advance to Underlord and fucking Kiro had turned up again. I was just thinking, really? Are we doing this? I got so mad. And then I realized that it was Mercy and I was like, oh, thank God. Like, then for a split second, I thought Mercy was like fucking with him or something. I didn't know what was going on. But she says, if you trigger the advancement now, in this weak aura with only these few natural treasures, the transformation will occur slowly over 2 or 3 weeks. And once you start, there's no ending it early. It's better than nothing, But if you know what your revelation is, you should wait until you're in Nightwheel Valley, and then advancement can happen like that. And she tries to snap her fingers, but she can't because she's got that weird gold sign that makes her fingers all slippery with the shadow. She says it could take longer, but it's still way faster than here. And he appreciates so deeply that she helped him and is like, we need to go and help Yeren too. And when he offers to help her in response, she says, don't waste anything on me. My family used to give me the best resources. I'm passing along what I can. He looked at her and loomed over her. Do you have any of those resources left? No. And would you have to return home to get them? Yes. But you don't want to do that. And you don't want to take ours because you feel like you're stealing from us. Now I owe you. Next time, you won't have to worry about taking anything from me because I'll be repaying you a favor. 2 favors, actually. I'd like to ask you for one more. So then we go to them coming into Yeren's tent after she has also tried to do her advancement and she can't. Now, listen. I understand the reasoning behind writing it this way, but I will say it's a bit of a loophole or a plot hole that nobody mentioned to them how long it takes to advance to Underlord if you're not in the right scenario and circumstances and surrounded with enough aura. I feel like if the fucking sole thing that you are working towards over the past month is to become Underlord, that shit should have come up. Okay? Let's just be honest. That's a bit of a silly thing that nobody has talked about that before. It should have been talked about. It should be mentioned when that's all they're doing every day is just trying to cycle. Yeah, somebody should have warned them about that. I'm just saying. Anyway, moving forward. So, she thinks about, let's see, she sensed Lindon. His spirit had swelled for an instant, then ebbed. Had he done it? No, he hadn't broken through, or she would sense his power. What had happened? So she can feel him all the way off there, like she can tell something went on. And they come running in yelling, follow your fear. And this moment, I love how, like, Lindon is really struggling with the fact that his truth is so pathetic as he thinks of it. I got news for you, Lindon. Most of us in our lives are motivated by really pathetic shit. That's what therapy is all about, baby. Realizing that you think hateful things about yourself. It's awful to realize that practically every decision you've made has been motivated by like some kind of self-loathing or deep fear. But guess what? That's sort of how it works. And then you learn that, and then you figure out ways to distance yourself more and more from those kinds of reactions and that kind of motivation until you're being a little bit more rational, hopefully, more often at least than you were before. And it's just part of growing. So good for you. I'm just saying, Lindon. I get it. I really do. Me, fear of failure, fear of like being really ordinary. I just don't want to constantly fall into the same traps as everybody else. It's like the sort of thing of like learning from other people's mistakes. And so I try sometimes too hard to do things in a different way. And it doesn't always work out because sometimes things are done in a way that they're done because like people know what they're talking about. But I can be very defiant, you know. So he tells her, I move forward to prove, let's see. When she says, what happened? He says, I don't want to be useless. I move forward to prove that I am worth something, I guess. His words pierced Yeren. That was stupid. He wouldn't be useless, even if he stayed at the same level he was forever. And she is so immediately defensive of him, which is just what you want from your friends, of course. But then she immediately is like, but I did treat him like that, though. And I mean, she did. When it's really great that I like have been re-listening to the first few books, because she's really rough with him about how nobody is going to want to even like talk about taking him onto their team and teaching him unless he's at least an iron, because he's a complete waste otherwise. And she's trying to be as real with him as she can, because he has like the wrong idea about how shit's going to work. But also, it's really harsh, you know, and she's just, Yaren is harsh. That's part of who she is. And I respect that, because I can be that way too. But I appreciate that she's able to be honest with herself here and admit that she contributed to that feeling. There's just no way to step around that. She'd been afraid he couldn't keep up with her, afraid she would have to leave him behind, or that he would have to leave her behind. Even in her own mind, she'd thought of their advancement as the most important thing about them both. She wanted to tell him that wasn't true, and even to apologize, but she couldn't put words to the feeling. So, at this point, Mercy's like, all right, try it. And she gets into cycling position, and Mercy asks her, what are you afraid of? And she drilled down into herself. Her desire to protect people probably stemmed from a fear of loss, and her desire for freedom maybe sprang from the fear of losing that freedom to the Blood Shadow. But in the end, one fear outshone all the others. Seeing the vital aura around her, she was too aware of the line of green life aura running down her spine. The dim, crooked, flickering line of light that could go out any second. Trying to think about other fears while her life hung by a frayed thread was like trying to see the stars with the sun in the sky. Maybe that meant it was her revelation. Was survival the desire that drove her to the sacred arts? That rang false. She wasn't fighting to live forever, or she wouldn't be so reckless with her life. And Yaren just gets more and more frustrating and is like, that doesn't work. It's just not doing it. I really loved this because it works super well for Lindon, but she's dealing with a much more immediate, unavoidable threat. And that fear being like the overwhelming thing that fails to allow her to see anything else makes total sense. And it also keeps the mystery going a little bit. Like, what is it for her? I have to imagine she advances so that she'll be like useful enough to not be alone. It's sort of similar to Lindon in a way. Lindon felt useless because he was so weak. And Yaren isn't weak, but it does feel like she's like maybe it's that she's afraid she'll hurt people. I don't know. But she definitely has like a fear of abandonment, you know, and I have to think that's tied in somehow. So Narugwe at this point manages to get in touch with them with an alarm. Let's see, a flare of wind and dream madra and an alarm echoed through the room. Yaren, come see me, and if the Black Flame boy and the Akura girl are with you, bring them. They're not in their rooms. And when they arrive, he wants to know if they have any input on what we should do. Because now it turns out the Black Flame Empire is giving up on the tournament. And at first Lindon's like, what the fuck? And Narugwe is like, no, okay, listen. We're not like formally withdrawing. The sage, as we know, is the one that holds the fates of everybody in her hands, and she might still pick one of us. But in 3 days, we just don't like our chances of getting enough underlords to even like compete. It's not looking great. So we kind of feel like we're just going to pull back our expectations a little bit. So let's see. At least Yaren and I could go back in. You've been sending scouts and they've returned. Only a day or two inside and maybe you'd have 2 new underlords. So Narugwe points at the map and there is this like wasteland in the middle that looks like a desert, at least on the map. Their sacred artists are the farthest thing from unified, but they're a thin fence against the dragons even further east. After the Dread God attack, we lost contact with much of our territory against that border. The Wastelanders could be moving in even now, and who's to stop them? Beyond them are the dragons. They stay away because of a few real monsters in the Wasteland and out of respect for the Akura family. Our favor with the Akuras tells the dragons how important we are. If you all like us, then you'll respond quick, and if you don't, then maybe you'll look the other way while they push through the wastelands and snap up a few villages. The jungle only stays peaceful because of the constant Skysworn supervision. I've left a few teams down there, but most of us are here over the capital. The longer we stay here, the more towns and sects and schools and villages will be swallowed up by the jungle. To the north is the Trackless Sea, the widest ocean we know, covers half the world by our maps. The Kotai clan mans this wall, which keeps the ocean tribes out. Those enemies are glad to know we're focused somewhere else. They're hungry for the land. And Lindon is looking at where Sacred Valley is. It's unnamed, and the map just has it listed as restricted territory, dangerous and forbidden, next to the seal of the Akura family. What? Dangerous and forbidden. Why? What is that? It's not, though. I didn't think. His eyes moved across the wilds to Serpent's Grave, then to the capital where he was now. He had skipped across dozens of regions, towns, notes and names he'd never heard of, places he'd only passed over without thinking. He was a long way from home. Question, is there a map that we as readers can look at? And am I allowed? I didn't see one in the book, but I'm using the Kindle book, so I had just jumped to chapter 1. I didn't have to turn pages to get there, and there might be one in the beginning of the book that I didn't see. But sometimes I know maps can be spoilery, so I don't want to look, even if there is one, unless I get the all clear. Andy says, sadly, no official maps. Honestly, I'm shocked. An author like this, I really expect them to be all about making a map. And I'm not mad about it because sometimes it can feel a little bit hokey. But I am just curious, you know? I wonder if anybody has made unofficial maps. They have to have. But they're going to be full of nonsense. Anyway. So this is when he's continues talking about all of their neighbors, the Akura family. I won't get into this too much. It's probably going to wind up being important, but I just don't have time to quote everything. And he says, establishing trade or any relationship is worth a great price. If we can distinguish ourselves in front of the world, we can show them that we're strong enough to defend ourselves. And not to mention, your family promised us 100 million high-grade scales for each qualified competitor we provide, and further gifts if they give a good performance in the tournament. If the dice had fallen right, we might have gained ourselves glory we hadn't seen for hundreds of years. Now, it's too late. Rather than giving up, it's more accurate to say we're finally admitting our loss. Got more Underlords than we lost, and that will be good for security. So Yaren's basically so what do you want from us? And he says, I want to know if you have any input. And Lindon's looking at him I'm sorry. What? Did you just ask us for advice? Is that happening? And yeah, the short answer is correct. I wanted to know if you had any thoughts about our withdrawal or our strategy moving forward. I asked all my True Golds the same question. She's the only Akura, so maybe she knows something worth hearing. And Lindon is just super fixated on, he has to reach Underlord. The idea of not being at the point where he can be selected to compete, it's unthinkable. He just doesn't even want to entertain that idea. And he's can we find a way to kill Kiro and Mira? And if we did that, would that fix things? And he's I don't think so, because they probably have other Underlords. And they have an overlord that's defending them. And he doesn't like the idea of just killing them, like being the solution. And it says, and the Sage of the Silver Heart had restricted bloodshed. Then he remembered something he couldn't believe he'd forgotten. He turned on the spot and seized Mercy. Her purple eyes widened. And that's the end of that chapter. And I had no idea what that was about. And it turns out what it's about is that he remembers all of a sudden that there's a vault full of fucking treasure that they could potentially raid. And that, yeah, she's like technically not supposed to, but there's a lot of things you're not technically supposed to do that the Sage would definitely turn a blind eye to. So that makes a ton of sense. And you guys, when I realized that we were about to try and do a heist, I got so hype. Now, it doesn't quite work out the way that we thought, but we'll get there. So, we go to the meeting with everybody as they are figuring out, including the Emperor, as they are figuring out how to do this heist. And Mercy is in charge, which is the best. She's so tiny and silly, and I just love her. And being the one that's like deciding that she's going to run shit. I keep thinking about her saying, I don't want to accept myself as I am to her aunt, and wondering what her truth is that she doesn't want to accept. Like, is her truth, I practice the sacred arts to dominate other people? Like, did she find out something kind of ugly about herself that she doesn't want to be true? So yeah, she tells them all about the idea here being basically that the Sage is going to look the other way. And she sort of hand waves it like in a way that makes everybody else lose a little bit of faith that she knows for sure that's how it would work. And at one point, this person, I'm trying to remember who it is that says this. We will not act without the Sage's permission. I think is it the Emperor? With her mediation, even if we fail, we will only be sent home in shame rather than annihilated. And only with her approval can we be sure we will not face her wrath, even in victory. Mercy shrugged, then asked her. Her eyes rose up to the corner of the room. Everyone in the room turned. There, in the high ceilings, waited a silver and purple owl that none of them had seen. And everybody is like, oh, shit. Okay, except for one dude, a Kotai Underlord, who tries to be like, we don't know that's really, and apparently she does some shit to him that I can only imagine is sort of similar to what she did to the Emperor that one time, because nobody else sees it, but he has a very strong reaction and immediately apologizes. So finally they say, what time do we leave? And we cut from there to the Seishen kingdom and them celebrating how Daji has ascended to Underlord, which honestly was some bad news. Daji is a bad, bad boy. And I don't mean that in the sexy way. He sucks. And the fact that he has reached Underlord, I really wonder what his truth is. I practice the sacred arts so that I can beat everybody to a pulp and then piss on them as they like lay crumpled on the ground. Like, he feels for sure like one of the dudes that would play one of those video games where you stand over your fallen enemy and like teabag their corpse. That feels like just real dodgy energy to me. So this kid having ascended, I just don't like it. I love the fact that the Sage shows up and is just basically like, yeah, congrats, but you're definitely still not up to par. He gets so mad. However, this bitch, she's like, hey, so I thought it would be super fun if I told them it was cool that they do this heist. And then I came to you and told you they were about to do this heist. So you guys just, whatever you're going to do, just go ahead and I'm going to owl my way over to this tree here and watch what happens. Oh, I hate you so much. Why? And I know why. Because she really thinks that pitting them against each other is going to make them each stronger. And she thinks that's like going to be best for the Empire to like force people into their strength. But honestly, it's so twisted and fucked up and I hate it. I don't like it. Meanwhile, Kiro is fine. The injury that he sustained, which I thought might be kind of serious, it turns out that Mira is able to like heal him very easily. And apparently when she heals him, he had like passed out. And he later found out his father had been furious. Mira might have been executed if she hadn't been even more distraught than King Takata himself. He had been forced to personally restrain her to keep her from diving through the Black Flame Empire portal and attacking all on her own. I really want to know what the fuck Mira's deal is, because it's very clear she's not all there. And I just don't know if like that's how she's always been, or if there is something that happened to her. And there's like, I would almost, it doesn't feel like it's romantic. I had thought initially, and the more I see of the way they like interact, it doesn't feel that way. I don't know if maybe they had been and something happened to her that caused it to like, that's still sort of there, but it's not the primary thing, you know, like once somebody starts straying in a place where it's like their mental capacity isn't what it was, you start to get into weird areas with like consent and stuff. And so they become more childlike, where it's sort of, you have to treat it as if you have to be hands off. And I wonder if maybe that's it, if there was something between them and she got injured. And so she still has the attachment to him and him to her, but it isn't how it had been before. Or like, I was thinking it could even be that they're like siblings, except for the way the king treats her. Like there's just no way that they're related. And I don't know. So this is the point where the sage shows up, and this is like a real party that everybody's truly celebrating. And this sage just shits all over it. Like she really ruins it for everybody. Congratulations. You've benefited greatly from my garden. And the king is all like, of course. There were a few pests, but we drove them out for you. And she says, bold of you. You pushed at the edges of my command for restraint. And he's like, I mean, we just, we knew it was necessary to grasp the victory. And she just says, victory? And I mean, honestly, they injured your son so badly that him and Mira had to do like an escape to make sure, like, no. He says it's victory because they have produced so many Underlords since then. But that's not it. You're not fooling anybody. She knows, and that ain't it. You produced a bunch of Underlords because she was generous and you guys managed to take the valley. But this isn't what she wanted was Lindon made an example of. And Lindon came out looking like a fucking badass, which is the opposite of how that was supposed to go for the sake of the punishment he's meant to be enduring because he killed Harmony, or kind of killed Harmony. So, yeah. And this is when Daji almost tries to get in her face, and Kiro has to like step in front of Daji before he does something idiotic. And honestly, Kiro, you won't be able to do that forever. Stop stepping in front of him. He's Underlord now too. Just let him make his mistakes and suffer the consequences, because you're just not always going to be there, man. And if he dies, he dies. That's how that go. So yeah, she says, send your 3 candidates to the location I have indicated and follow the directions I have left for you. The Black Flame Empire will return, and I want to see you demonstrate your skills fairly. Hold nothing back. I have only one reminder for you. You should not harm Akura Mercy. The same words were repeated on the paper beneath the map. You should not harm Akura Mercy. The phrasing bothered him. It should. That's Fae fucking talk there. You should not. That's not don't. That's you should not. That feels like somebody can. Not you, but like, you know, if somebody happens to, what can you do? There's something, she's left herself some loophole there. I don't like it. And she fades out, and Dakota comes over to Kiro and is like, we're going to meet them with full force. You're going to grind them into dust. We're going to make new armor for you. And they ask, how many sets of armor should we prepare? And he says 2. And Kiro interrupts and says, no, 3. And his dad gets really mad. But he's like, I'm doing it. I'm saying it. It's time. I don't want you behind me any longer, he said quietly. I need you by my side. I will not fail you again, she swore. She thought he was giving her the means to serve him better. It was the opposite. He was trying for once to serve her. You've never failed me, he said. Between his fingers, he gripped the sage's letter tight. He was the one who couldn't fail again. So, I've only got like 5 minutes, but we're going to talk about chapter 16. So, they head into Nightwheel Valley. They're, you know, Mercy and Yaren and Lindon, they're all wearing their armor. I miss Orthos, guys. I really do. And they are just basically, everybody's like a ball of anxiety about this whole thing. Let's see. It wasn't as risky as it sounded, Cassius assured them. The Seishen kingdom could not have time to mobilize a force like theirs, and the strongest sacred artist on their side, the king, would be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. If they had an archlord, this would be suicidal. As it was, they had little to lose. Yeah, about that. So, they head in. And as they're heading in, Ethan is like, oh, BT dubs, Lindon. I just wanted to hand you this real quick. And it's the fucking Archstone. And Lindon's like, oh my God. And Ethan, you have no idea the things I had to do to procure this for you, my beloved disciple. The indignities I had to suffer. The depths of depravity to which I had to sink. Truly, the heavens must have wept the day they created a man of such generosity, such selfless spirit as your master. Please, do not weep. Instead, take this gift and know that I would gift thee with my very beating heart should you request it. This motherfucker is so much. I really love him so much. I really do. I hate him, but I love him so much. Oh, God. Owen just reached the point where I was listening with him when Ethan, like, first tries to, like, pretend fight Crawl and Jailong and, like, just basically dances around everybody and is like, hey, thanks for the entertainment. Gotta go. And he was like, that was awesome. And then he was telling me last night, I just reached the part where Ethan joins the mining crew, but isn't really doing anything. And he said, I really feel like Ethan should be wearing like one of those hats with the little propeller on it and a t-shirt that says, ain't I a stinker? So Lindon puts the Archstone into his soul space. He isn't able to use his void key as freely as he wants because he doesn't want people to know he even has it. And he sees at one point how Ethan's able to reach in and out of it really easily and is like, I really have to figure out a way to do it like that because he's clearly pulling things out of nowhere and it has to be a void key, but I can't and I think it's actually his soul space if I'm not mistaken, but he has a really big one. If I remember correctly when we've read from his perspective, but I might be getting that wrong. Cause I feel like he has a big soul space the same way that he has a ton of Madra. But yeah, anyway, he says, gratitude, please lift your head. Really, please. And he says, I would wait to break that until you're ready to forge it. You don't want the Madra to lose any potency, and you never know what it will do if you break it uncontrolled. And then he goes up to Yaren and says, be calm, little sister. You have many years ahead of you. And I was like, don't just say that, though. Oh, I want so much to believe you, and I'm sure you're right. But, like, also, that's just... I hate him dropping bombs like that and then just fucking walking away. So, they are heading in, and they wind up in what turns out to be, like, a big scripted barrier that does something that reminds me very much of another thing from Legend of Korra. And I've mentioned before how much I feel like parts of this book or this series are influenced by Legend of Korra and Airbender. But there's basically a fog of like eternal loneliness or something. I can't remember what it's called, but it's in the spirit realm. And if you get like dropped into it, you sort of like lose any motivation and memory of who you were and what you want and why you're here. And you just stand there sort of staring into space, barely moving for eternity. And that is what springs up to defend the vault from them. And the only thing that really saves Lindon is having Dross like help get him back on track. And he has to pull out Little Blue and get her to go from one person to another and restore all of them. And even doing that is just going to buy them like a couple of minutes. It's not going to be a ton of time. And I don't think that she's able to save everyone. I think that he has her like help out some key players, but she begins fading out pretty quick once she's helped several people. So she's just, there's not enough of her to do what needs doing for the whole group. And it's just such a like, I just hate it so much. This whole thing is just really rough, the way that they are completely anticipated and yet they come in really thinking that they're being stealthy. There's something sort of embarrassing about it. And I just, I hate it. It's a little bit humiliating. So then we have a little chat between Ethan and the Emperor. And they are talking about like how best to proceed. And basically they come to the agreement that if they knew we were coming, there's no chance. We are going to have to just like defend ourselves. But the actual mission we're here for, we're going to have to abandon it. And Ethan is like, I 100% agree. Thing is, I am going to have to be the one to deal with those guys because I think you are going to help over there. And he points, and it turns out that there is another ship that's coming. I'll overload the constructs myself. They'll need some maintenance when we return, but I need you to deal with that. A small cloud ship the size of a lifeboat emerged from the white haze. I don't know who's on it. I have to imagine that it's like Kiro and company. But yeah, I don't love it. It feels really just rude. And I know I use that word a lot, but honestly, like I said, it's a little humiliating. Ethan looked at the Emperor. 29 lords and ladies, one of which is an overlord. How many do you think we're worth? 10, the Emperor said immediately, still watching the skies. I can match the Overlord, and in a fighting retreat, perhaps 1 or 2 Underlords more. I trust you to tie up 3 without getting yourself killed, though I doubt you can finish them. I'm honored by your confidence in me, Ethan said, though it depends on their deployment. A few of them are old and dangerous, and I would hesitate to face them even alone. They would ruin my hair. Ethan is just... He's clearly, like, more than just a regular Underlord, but he just doesn't want people to know that which I understand. I'm sure that's a huge advantage, but also, like, I want to know personally. Just tell me, Ethan. It's fine. I won't tell anybody, I promise. I won't. I just want to know. What is it? What do you got going on there, buddy? Tell me. Tell me. Tell me. Tell me. So, that chapter ends at 253 of 343 pages, which includes epilogue and next time. Let's see if I go back. Let's see. 343, if I just take until, let's see, we'll go to the epilogue. 337. Okay. So, I'll divide it into about 2 sections of about 40 pages, roughly, is what I'll do. I'll make them each a bit shorter so I have more time. I think that'll be smart. All right, I'm going to wrap up. But thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. Thank you again, Andy, very much for commissioning this series. I hope that you guys have been enjoying the coverage, and I will see you again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.